Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. On today's Sounding Off, he's played with Quiet Riot, Ozzy Osbourne, Whitesnake, and a whole host of other bands. He's a dear friend of mine. I've talked to him many times in the past. Rudy Sarzo is with us today on Sounding Off, coming up next. Here he is, and welcome.
Rick, how you doing?
I'm doing great. There's a lot of really interesting things that we talked about, Rudy. We began talking about how you were born in Havana, right, in Cuba.
Yes, I was born in Cuba.
So
yes.
when did you first come over? And you came to Miami, then, right?
That's right. My family left Cuba right between the Bay of Pig invasion and the missile crisis.
Okay.
The October missile crisis. It took my family about a year and a half to get all of the paperwork. You know, the visa, getting somebody to sponsor us from the United States, getting the passport, buying the tickets, doing all that stuff. So it was a lengthy process.
Now, was there a Cuban community though that would help? Bring people in? Was there a group of people? Did you have any relatives here, or you just came over without knowing anyone?
Yes, this is in 1961, so there was not the size of community that we have today.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the local government was trying to avoid what eventually happened, only because there was not enough jobs in Miami proper. I mean, if you look at Miami, it's pretty much either export, import, tourism, and that's about it.
Right.
You know, export, import, because it's kind of like the gateway to South America and parts of Europe.
Yep.
That's and also the yacht building industry. This is in addition to, of course, utilities and everything that makes a community run. But there was no industries, no other major industry besides that. So what they did is we lived in Miami until 1963, from 61 to 63. Then we were relocated, and that relocation program happened through the Catholic Church.
Okay.
My family picked New Jersey as the place to go to. And actually in New Jersey, in West New York, where we actually wound up living, there was more of a Cuban community there than what was happening in Miami, because in Miami, it seemed like as soon as families arrived, they were sending them across the country. I mean, you could choose anywhere between Chicago to Alaska to Los Angeles,
That's interesting.
and so on.
Now,
Yeah.
How did you first get involved in music?
I was a fat little kid trying to get girls' attention. When I saw the Beatles and Ed Sullivan, I thought that's my ticket. But ultimately that was like my biggest motivation. Even though I actually played guitar prior to the Beatles coming on Ed Sullivan. Back in the day on television, we had shows like Jimmy Dean Show. We had Hootenanny. We had shows that were folk based and country based, not really rock and roll. And then after the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan, they just came out of nowhere, like Shindig, Hullabaloo, Dick Clark. Every afternoon he had like regional shows, and it was great. It was wonderful. I mean, it was like overnight. It happened. The Beatles happened. The next day in school, all the kids going from the Pompadour, like the Four Seasons, we're just coming forward. We have bands all of a sudden, overnight. It was total Beatle mania. So everybody just started picking up guitars and playing, and I already have my guitar, but I even though I had my guitar, I lean more towards the ventures.
Okay.
So I would just pick up like melodies and little solos here and there. I never really got heavily into using like the cage system or something like that, just to learn chords.
When did you end up going back to Florida?
My family got fed up with the winters in New Jersey, so
that's not surprising.
We piled up in my family's Corvair. And we drove all the way from New Jersey back down to Miami. This is 66. So we were there for about 3 years. So in 1966, I was back in Miami. You know.
And did you start playing in bands at that time?
That's around the time, yes, because every block in my neighborhood, yeah, every block had a band. So I was on this block, so I could not join the band across the street. I had to be in my band here. That was the rules, you know. And so I walk in somebody's garage, you know, one of the kids that they were rehearsing, and I go, "Hey, I've introduced myself. I just arrived, and I want to join your band." And say, "Well, we got too many guitar players, so if you want to play the bass, you can be in the band." So
That always made it easier, right? Playing the bass.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if a few years ago I was doing an interview and I got asked that question, how did I start playing bass? And as I was telling the story, it hit upon me that actually I was doing something. I was living my life according to somebody else's needs. We need a bass player. You're going to be the bass player. And I got angry and I said, wait a minute. You know, I want to play. So I went and I grabbed my guitar and started devoting more time to my guitar, which actually gave me a whole different angle to playing bass because I had to all of a sudden, you know, relearn an instrument. Not something that I was used to playing. You know, something it's like muscle memory. No, now I gotta like get back into the guitar, pick up on the cage system, start playing all the chords, doing all of that, and it was like, wait a minute, this is really helping me with my bass playing because it's breaking me out of my box,
right?
You know, and I think that was kind of like what took me on the path of like, let me check all of these videos on YouTube, all this wealth of information that eventually led me to discovering you on YouTube, and you've become my go-to website because I mean it's. You know, there are sites devoted to a specific instruments, but what I wanted was more musical knowledge. And like you say, everything music, you know, and not just about rock and not just about any particular genre. It's music in general. And it's up to the individual with that knowledge to create whatever style of music they desire to make.
Well, it was really fascinating to me when you were, because being in Florida, in Miami in the early 70s, where you had people, you know, you had Jocko there, you had Will Lee, you said was there, but you also had people, I think the guys at the Dixie Dregs were there at the time, and then Pat Metheny was there at the time. It was really the place to be, was in Miami in the early 70s. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, I became aware of those musicians from playing in the same scene. I went to Miami-Dade junior college.
Okay.
Because I couldn't afford the University of Miami. You know, so I went to the junior college. And they didn't have the greatest music department. What they did have was a great mass communication department. Motion picture, television, and radio, producing and directing and all of that. So I got more into that. Actually, music became a minor, and my major was mass communication. We had a lot of our department was full of executives from major television and radio stations that had retired and had nothing better to do. Just you know, say, hey, you know, let me just go and teach at this college for a few hours. So we had like the cream of the crop in our school as far as mass communication. But our school program for music was very by the book, textbook. You know, a teacher will open the textbook and write, you know, notations on the chalkboard, and that would be it. I could not really apply it to a working situation. I was already playing clubs. I was already playing gigs, and one of the musicians that was in the same circuit, well, there were two. There was Jocko. He was playing a lot at the Newport Resort with Wayne Cochran, and the other one was Will Lee. And of course, they had real heavy music education, you know, and we're hanging around with guys that had the same education. The people that I play with were basically guys who we would pick anything from the top 40, you know, playlist, and learn those songs by ear. So that was my education, training my ear. I mean, and it's not like it was back in the day that you had to drop the needle.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's
totally.
like, and Yeah, and you better catch it within 2 or 3 takes before the needle scratches the 45 and you can't use it anymore, so you have to like really be really really fast. So that was like, even though I did not put it to paper, it was kind of like memory transcribing.
Yes. Which
So
is,
that was,
that's what I tell people to do. That's the quickest way to learn. I always say is transcribing, but actually it's not writing it down. It's just memorizing it, just figuring it out by ear and memorizing.
yes. And having done that, I gotta tell you, I'm really finding some incredible benefits that take me to the next level when I watch your tutorials and you actually are breaking down, like let's say soloing on giant steps, and you're just in that. I mean, the way you explain it is so crystal clear. The fact that when the riff is playing the on the tone center, the chords,
Yep.
and then you're doing all the passing notes, and it's like, wow, he's actually playing from within the chord, and then he's using it, embellishing it with passing tones. That's fantastic. Nobody really explained that to me before. As a matter of fact, nobody really explained to me that it's basically based on chord tones.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what you would play on bass. What Coltrane played were bass lines on his saxophone.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what we basically, since Jacko, that's what it's been. That's been our goal to play. As a matter of fact, there was another bass player, Tim Bogart from Vanilla Fudge.
Oh yeah.
And Cactus and all that. He was to me the first guy, because the Vanilla Fudge preceded Jacko.
Yeah.
That was actually playing Coltrane sax lines on the bass. Magnificent,
Yeah.
in a pop heavy metal, psychedelic band, Vanilla Fudge, So yes, but there's just also so much more to the bass, the fact that you can play chordal, you can play chords and double stops that you cannot really do with the saxophone.
Talk about the influence of polyrhythms on players like bass players in Miami at the time. The rhythms of from Cuba.
Yeah, okay, playing in a rock band in Miami was a completely different experience than for me playing in a rock band. Let's say by the time I left Miami and I went to Chicago and I played in that circuit, and then ultimately I wound up in Los Angeles playing with Quiet Riot, which I consider Quiet Riot to be my first real rock band. And that's with Randy Rhoads and Kevin DuBrow, Drew Forsythe. It's because even though Randy Rhoads was incredibly very knowledgeable about music theory, his mom ran a music school. She was like the first female trumpet player at UCLA, and it was like, this is a legacy, musical legacy to the family. But as far as the band goes, it was very pure rock and roll British influence.
Yes.
Anything from glam, like Queen and Elton John and whatever, Mott the Hoople, to a little bit of the British R&B such as Humble Pie. So it had that almost metronomic feel about it. Whereas I played rock and roll in Miami originally with Cuban guys.
Yeah.
So even the the Cuban singers singing any rock song sounded like Cubans, like let's say Rick Ricardo version, with an accent.
Right.
But to us, that was normal because we talk like that. Of course, we're gonna sing like that.
Yeah.
I didn't really start hearing local rock bands that sounded like Americans until I left Miami.
That's fascinating.
So part of that whole sound was that it was not metronomic. There was a swing to it. We call it in Spanish tumbao. Like if you're going to so it's even if we play rock, it had to be syncopated, otherwise you could not get all the Cuban kids to dance.
Right.
Because it's in our DNA.
Yeah, and that was really, that was part of Jocko's whole thing, was his feel that's related to that people probably don't
Absolutely.
realize that because I never thought about that. Oh, he was, playing down in Miami at the time, and that was part of the music scene, was that heavy influence of those rhythmic elements that were part of the scene.
Absolutely. And if you were in a working top 40 band, you had to play anything from I Shot the Sheriff to You're Having My Baby. If it's in the top 40, you're going to play it.
Well, talk about how
Yeah.
eclectic the top 40 was back then, too. I mean, anything could have been on, right?
And it was
Yeah.
anything. Yeah. And then you learn some tricks, on how to not just to get the gig as a band, but to keep the gig. You will keep the gig if people dance to you.
Right.
That's all the club owner care about.
Yeah.
That you were playing to what's on the top 40 list and people dance. So we found that the best ingredient to add to our band was a conga player.
Right.
Because no matter what song you play, there was a conga beat to it. So we would do extensions of like let's say Pinball Wizard was on the top 40. We played it, and then at the end we would extend it like if it was like a Santana. Yeah, so again, having a conga player there gave us the opportunity to branch off into not only top 40 but some of the more obscure bands, like let's say Traffic.
Okay.
Traffic had a lot of percussion in their songs.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Medicated Goo, and some of the Rolling Stones. Can't You Hear Me Knocking, which was not a top 40 hit, but it had that da 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 da, and that the whole thing going on. It's Sympathy for the Devil. So it kind of like, yeah, we would do some of the top 40, but also add in all this really danceable stuff to it. So it helped us to break it a little bit out of the mold, but still it had to be dance. It had to feel Latino.
Okay, so tell me how you ended up making the decision to leave then?
Oh, disco happened.
And no way you're going to play disco covers, right?
Well, it wasn't really that. See, it's I wanted to be a rock musician, and even though I might have been playing You're Having My Baby, you can still rock it out a little bit, because it doesn't have that,
Right.
Plus, disco killed the guitar, basically. It was great for bass players. I loved it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be in a band with guitars, and my brother was a guitar player at the time, so it was more like a family decision. It was like disco. My brother played a lot. Let's say we would do like Barry White.
Yeah.
And he would play like a bow on his guitar to make it sound like strings. Just a lot of waka waka waka. Shaft was really big then. So it was.
I remember.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, they were coming out with records, and it was like, damn, we want to play that, but we can't. So it was like, yeah, we got to get out of here. So it was definitely a musical decision. And we headed up towards New York. We wound up in Utica. And then we eventually came down a couple of months later to the New Jersey, like Paterson, New Jersey, adjacent to, to the bridge, just to go closer to the city. And this is like 1976. And there was a really big scene going on. You have Max's Kansas City and CBGBs and all that happening. But it was very hard to survive there. So actually, my brother got married, and I went off on my own and wound up in Chicago.
Okay.
And that was an incredible club scene going on in Chicago at that time. Cheap Trick had just gotten signed. Rufus came out of there. There was all of these great musicians. And eventually a few of us wound up in Los Angeles. And the band broke up, and I wound up in Quiet Riot.
Well, tell me about initially getting to Los Angeles. Tell me about the when you initially got there. What did you do? Did you have a job? Where did you stay? So you drive into Los Angeles, and then what?
Yeah. I was a proud starving musician. basically homeless. If it wasn't for the kindness of these ladies, that there was like a circuit, like a network of these ladies that they took newly arrived musicians and in LA and kind of like put one over here, another one over there, and if you did not hit it off with one of the ladies, you just move, they move you around basically.
Okay.
And after a little while, I got a day job and flipping veggie burgers.
Okay.
And doing things like that. But it just no matter what I did, it was I had to do what I needed to do to survive and become a working musician.
So did you start going out and seeing bands? How did you meet Randy?
Oh my God, yes.
So you're out all the time seeing bands.
Every night. Yeah, it's actually I did not meet Randy until I started until I did the audition for Quiet Riot. But I had met Kevin DuBrow one night after a Quiet Riot show at a local club called the Starwood, and I was really impressed, and I was not trying to hit him for a gig. I was just like, honestly, like, man, you guys really look like you are an arena band performing in a club. You guys, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. Yes, sooner or later you're gonna get signed. So I had no idea that within less than a year I was gonna get the phone call to audition, which I did, and that's how I got the gig.
So once you started in Quiet Riot, I mean, you and Randy were really tight.
Yeah, locally, when we were playing locally, we had very little time to socialize. We would rehearse every night with Quiet Riot. We would do the set twice, forwards and backwards. And we would play about 2 weekends at the Starwood a month, 2 weekends, which is like 3 nights. Like I think it was Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
And how long would the set be? How long would you play for each night?
About an hour and 15.
Okay.
Regular set.
Okay, so it'd be like 14 songs or something like that.
Oh yeah, and then try out any of the new material, to record some demos if that was the case, So we spent that time. Then I really got to hang out with Randy more when I started teaching at Musonia, which is his mom's school.
Okay.
Music school. Then I really got to spend more time with him because he would teach about 8 hours at least a day.
So that was his day gig. He taught. Would he teach classical guitar? Is that what he did?
Anything.
Anything. Okay.
Whatever the student level was, that's what he would teach. He would always split it into two lessons in one. One lesson was teaching the student, like let's say they wanted to learn some Van Halen song. He would go and teach them the Van Halen song, and then he would teach the student what Randy felt the student needed to learn. So that was like the compromise between him and his students, which is something that really helped me when I started teaching, being able to teach them what they wanted, and then I would evaluate where they were at and then teach them what they needed to know to get to the next level.
So around 1978, Van Halen 1 came out. The Police had their first record come out. I mean, there's a lot of things that happened in 78. The late 70s, music was really changing again.
Well, it was a great time for rock music, but not for local Los Angeles rock musicians. I'm not talking about new wave or punk, because that, as soon as the Knack got the success with My Sharona,
yep,
that was it. Van Halen was the last metal band, rock band, to get signed out of the Los Angeles area. After that, and you had versions of Dokken, Quiet Riot, of course.
Yep.
Rat, Motley Crue. We were all playing in the circuit, Ray White, but there was. But
you were still a couple years off before that it was going to start happening.
Yes, way off.
Yeah.
Actually, more about 4 years, I would say, about 4 years. because again, it was, we didn't have the social networking like we have today. The local Los Angeles music scene was not aware of all of the new wave of British metal that was coming, that was actually happening in London at the time. That ironically, Randy became a part of when he left in '79 to join Ozzy.
Right.
At that time, there were already bands such as Def Leppard,
Mm-hmm.
there was Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Saxon. They were already, making a mark for themselves in in England and in Europe. Bands like
Yeah,
Scorpions,
yeah.
Judas Priest.
Those are the bands that were those were the metal bands or the rock bands that were when I was in high school that were happening then. Because Def Leppard, their first record I think was '78. Something
Mm-hmm.
77 maybe. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
early. I mean, people don't
Yeah,
realize that it was when they got massively big. It was in the mid 80s, but they
because of
began in the
MTV.
70s.
Yeah, yeah. But I got to tell you, there was no local record company going around saying, "Man, I wonder if on the Sunset Strip there's a Def Leppard type band."
Right,
No, nobody did. Nobody.
right.
No, all they wanted to know is, are you wearing a skinny tie? Are you new wave of punk? If you're not, you're a dinosaur. Were actually called dinosaurs by
No.
record and Randy must have been like 23 at the time. I was still in my mid 20s. It was like, really, it's over. you know, but so it's so Randy joins Ozzy. He goes over to England, and then all of a sudden he becomes aware there's all of these bands that exist that are not necessarily, that of course there is also the new wave and punk movement, which was very big in England,
It
but
was,
there was
yeah.
also room for other things, you know. There was room for this new up and coming, wave of British metal. So what happened was that where we were in Los Angeles as Quiet Riot, we were begging for a record deal. Everybody was. Everybody. It was like, where is that record deal for a rock band? It was like, because it did not exist. So anytime that a record company might become interested in us in Quiet Riot, such as when we took our fan club and we organized it to do a picket in front of every major record label in Los Angeles. Started out in Burbank and routed the way to Burbank to Capitol Records and then A&M and then went on Sunset Strip, pointing out at Sony. What happened was that nobody knew that in the city of Burbank, in order to do to create a picket,
Yeah.
you had to have a permit. So the
No.
police came. Yeah, so the police came and they chased everybody out, and everybody was this is nuts. They were traveling. Everybody was traveling on a flatbed truck with signs saying "Sign Quiet Riot," and all of that. It was insane. So somehow the news, the local news, got a hold of the story and put us on TV for like 5 minutes. This happened today. And a record company got a hold of us and took us into this A&R guy's office and took out Billboard magazine and says, "You see this song here by Rod Stewart? Do you think I'm sexy?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, if you guys can come up with a demo of a song like this one, we'll talk." Okay, so we went back into rehearsal and worked on the song. That turned out to be a song. It's a song called "One in a Million," and it was like, it wasn't that great, but it was at least an attempt to. Now we know what they're looking for.
Right.
Now we spoke to somebody. There's a direction of the band, which basically meant that not only were we chasing our tails, but we were just about to, we're willing to do anything. Now the big difference was that when Randy went over to England to work with Ozzy already had a record deal.
Yeah.
Ozzy told Randy, "Listen, just write, be yourself, write what's natural to you, whatever you want to write." And now Randy was able to go like, "Wait a minute, I don't have a record company telling me what to write, what not to write. I can actually go into my classical toolbox. I got some riffs that I was working on with Quiet Riot, with certain songs that never got recorded.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna bring those in. So if you listen to the first, to the Blizzard of Oz record, the first Ozzy record, there's some songs that are diatonic, based on kind of like what some of the Quiet Riot's Randy stuff was, except that you have Ozzy singing on it. You got Bob basically writing lyrics, so it was very different. By the second record, Diary of a Madman, which was actually recorded almost back to back, he had gone in a whole different direction. He incorporated more classical in it. I mean, actually in the songwriting structure of the song, not just he composed a classical piece on the first one called D, but that was just classical, a separate piece. Revelation Mother Earth has a lot of classical music influence in it. What he did with Diary, from the very beginning, you start getting that sense that he's not composing diatonically anymore. There's key changes, parallel modes. He's utilizing everything that he ever learned into his compositions because he didn't have anybody telling him not to.
Right.
Yeah.
And because Ozzy at the time he had already been, had Black Sabbath and he had a solo deal, he had way more free range to do whatever he wanted, right? He pretty much had, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I mean, how powerful were the labels back then? They were all powerful, right?
Well, in the case of Ozzy, it was not only the label, it was management. Don Arden, Sharon's father, owned Jet Records, and it was Jet Management. So even though it was distributed through Columbia, it was later Sony, CBS Columbia. And but there was a lot of trust. It's a trust factor that was laid upon Ozzy. Because Ozzy, he doesn't do crap. You know what I mean? He gets involved with very successful projects, whether it's a band or his solo career. He's got a certain filter that he knows what works and what doesn't work.
Right.
So there was that trust factor given to Ozzy. One of them was picking the guitar player. He picked Randy. He auditioned. He could have settled like, oh man, I got to make a record. So, okay, I got these 5 guys. Okay, I'll pick this guy. No, it was like, no, I haven't found the guitar player yet. And once he heard Randy, he says, that's the guy.
Now, was the need to have that guitar star, that was a big part of that era?
Yes, and I completely agree with you, and I'll give you a reference point. The last tour that Sabbath did with Ozzy, at that time, Van Halen was the opening band. Van Halen was so hot, the band.
Yeah.
It was so on that basically they felt like we cannot continue as we are. So that brought it the big rift. Now, as another reference point, I'm talking about from Ozzy's own reference point. The only guitar player he ever worked with was Tony Iommi.
Yes. Yeah.
A master riff maker.
Yes.
I mean, every song is
classic riffs.
Classic riffs.
Yeah.
And that's one element that Randy really brought into the picture. I think that Ozzy could have found a bunch of Van Halen clones in LA or anywhere else, but to find somebody who naturally can come up with classic riffs like Iommi, that's something else.
Very difficult, yeah.
And that's when he heard Randy just riffing, coming up with riffs, they say, "Oh man, I can turn these into songs." That's the guy,
right?
Because that's what he knew.
Well, then you put the soloing element to it, then you really have it.
Yes, and the fact that there's certain things that parallel Iommi's and Randy's contribution to Ozzy is that also Black Sabbath with the type of band or Iommi's playing that he would write separate pieces for his solo. I mean, as a matter of fact, most Black Sabbath songs of that period, pre-Ronnie James Dio, were very riffs and time changes, and key changes, and it was almost like jazz influence.
Yeah.
And so Randy brought that also. The fact that most of the songs from the Ozzy era for Randy, all the solos are separate little pieces, that are just written. It's not like he's soloing over the chorus or soloing over.
Yeah, they'd have separate sections for the solos, separate
exactly.
types of riffs that you'd solo over, separate key change, whatever it would be. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And look, you cannot really do that with having proper music education. You might emulate it, but you will not know why it works, and be able to expand on it, taking it to the next level. You might get lucky in one song and hit a chord accidentally, like oh wow, that sounds cool.
That sounds good.
Yeah, but why? I don't know. It just sounds cool. I play with many guys like that.
Okay, so then tell me about you going over and joining with them.
Oh, with Ozzy, actually, I joined them in Los Angeles. By the time that they were looking for a new rhythm section, Tommy Aldridge had just joined the band, and they were looking for a bass player. And I got to tell you, in retrospect, there were 100 bass players that could have done that gig. What they needed was somebody that they could trust immediately. There was a lot riding on that gig, and I already had gained Randy's trust factor from playing with him in Quiet Riot and teaching at Misonia, dependability, trustworthy. And that's why Randy kept telling them that Rudy is the guy, because he knew if I got the gig, I was going to show up, I'm going to do my best, I'm going to play everything the way it should be played. I was not going to be a drug addict, I was not going to be an alcoholic. I was going to pass the test, because they did put me through a test. When I say they, I'm talking about Sharon and Ozzy. And I don't blame them. They didn't know me. I had no track record. I was a guy sleeping on Kevin DuBro's apartment's floor on a sheet. To getting this phone call, to going to audition to get the gig. It wasn't like, oh yeah, Rudy. Oh yeah, he's played with all these other bands, and I tour with him. And oh yeah, I say he's a cool guy. Okay, yeah, let's call him up. I didn't know. I had no track record whatsoever, except for Randy saying, I trust this guy. He's the guy you want, because he's got all these qualities about him. That's how I got the gig.
It was interesting because when we talked before, I asked you what Randy would be doing nowadays had he lived. Talk about what Randy was thinking about at that time.
Yeah. We used to get off the stage and go in the back of the bus, and because we used to get off the stage, not into the dressing room, but to actually the bus and leave town.
Right.
And we used to take our clothes off and grab a glass of wine and listen to Lee Ritenour.
Yeah, Captain Fingers, yeah.
Captain Fingers. Every single night. That was it. He was going pretty much in that direction. Do you know who John Sticks is?
Yeah,
yeah. Okay. He became really, really close with Randy. And so around 1982, right after Randy gets his Best New Guitar Player for Guitar Player Magazine award, what really changed him, it was like, now all of a sudden, like, wow, people are listening to what I'm composing and performing.
Yeah.
Because, before that, we're talking 1981, 82, you don't know who's, unless somebody comes up to you at a mall and says, hey, you're Randy Rhoads, man, I love your music. You don't know. You don't have like Twitter, you don't have Facebook, you have nothing, Right. Yeah, unless it's done on a daily basis, somebody coming up to you and telling you, hey, listen, I really enjoy what you're doing. So now all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, people are listening. This is, wow. So at that moment, he really dedicated himself. If he was dedicating himself 80% to music daily, now it's 100%. No more going outside singing, no more doing this, no more doing that. It was just about the music. And he would, I mean, I have photos of him backstage playing his classical guitar before we would go on. And it's funny because around that time, I had gotten one of those Roland bass synthesizers, the first model.
Yeah.
And all I could get sound-wise out of it was this quack, 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 quack sound.
Right.
So it would be Randy doing, back in the dressing room playing his etude, and I'm going quack, 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 and Ozzy will walk in the room and just go, I want to hear some rock and roll, man. And then just like walk away, Yeah. Yeah, so he was really going in that direction. I mean, as a matter of fact, he had even asked John Sticks to introduce him to the session scene in New York. Randy read; he could read, no problem. So it was, if you put a chart in front of him, he'd just pick it up and do it. So he was like, he would be the perfect guy. What happened was that after playing, because he had been touring with Ozzy about 6 months even before I joined the band. So I would say, let's say after touring solidly for 2 years, we only had a 1 month break between the Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman record being released. Playing just basically the same songs every single night for such a creative individual, he was going crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, give me something new to play. I don't care if it's somebody else's music. I'll read it and play it and, get that creative, just get that feeling again, to be able to do something fresh. So he approached John Sticks, and John Sticks, was getting him what was going to do that for him.
I want to know about you today. You've continued your music education. You've never really stopped it, have you?
It went to a standby for a little while. I gotta tell you, it was a multiple reasons why. One of them is the lack of ability to learn back in the 80s when I was touring. Even though there were places like MIT, GIT available, so I was always on tour.
Yeah.
I was either working on a record or touring. So it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to take off 6 months and go to school here and learn,
Well, and people don't realize, put it in perspective, there were no resources other than Guitar Player Magazine or Bass Player Magazine, whatever. There were no resources to really learn anything. There was no internet, nothing. If you were on tour, you were basically, whatever you had with you was what you had. It wasn't like you could, check this out. I've got my iPhone and I can look this up and do that. Everything, it was very difficult to learn new things unless you were in a learning institution.
Yes. And I was a working musician already. So I couldn't take time off to do that.
Yeah.
It'd be crazy. My wife would kill me, So, here comes the internet age, and then all of a sudden, it's like I have all of these resources available. The first one, that being a bass player, I started checking out all these sites, and I came across Scott Devine. He's got his bass side, but it's mainly bass. Then I checked out some pianists teaching. But I gotta say, yours, and I'll tell you about this. As a matter of fact, we connected because I wrote you a thank you message. Yours is the most comprehensive. I mean, there's still stuff in there that I'm looking forward to getting into in the next few weeks, because one of the things is your tutorials. There's so much depth to them that I really recommend those that are watching to watch it multiple times. And so I'm working with certain, certain things that I can actually apply to my playing. And then I'm going to start working on the other tutorials that you have available that would be for other purposes, just basically to enrich my musical knowledge. So maybe I can share it, or maybe I can actually I'm looking forward to start working on some solo music, my own project, which is a little bit difficult for me to decide what to do with it because people are going to expect something that they are familiar
Yeah.
direction wise.
Right.
But then again, I've already done that. I don't want to do that. I recently did a record which was all Latin music that I sent over. That basically I did it for my folks, just to let them know that I have not lost touch with that. But yeah, you know, at this point in my life, I'm having so much fun playing and learning. It's like all of these sounds, notes, riffs that I've been hearing in my head. Now I'm able to figure out why are all these melodies, why are they so beautiful? Why are they so rich harmonically and all this music? Because even though I was playing clubs back in the 70s, the music that I bought and that I listened to was progressive music. I used to, fusion. I used to go to bed listening to Mahavishnu Orchestra every night, or put on King Crimson, put on Weather Report, from Weather Report, uh, uh, Return to Forever, from the very first record with Bill Connors in it. We used to go and watch all these bands because those bands will go on tour with rock bands.
Yes.
Like Mahavishnu Orchestra.
People don't realize that either, that would happen, that they would go on tour with rock bands.
Yeah, exactly. I saw Return to Forever at Colgate University opening up for Fleetwood Mac.
It's unbelievable.
I know. It was a great show.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah. And so I'm just basically right now, I'm at a point in my life that I can choose the gigs that I want to be in, the bands that are the people I want to play with. I can choose the records that I play on, and because I need to devote more time. It's like work smarter, not harder.
Right.
So the extra time that I don't have to apply to working not so smart, I can apply that to learning.
Right. Well, you and me both.
When do you sleep? It's like every day you have a video out.
Everybody asks me that. When do you sleep? Not very often. No, I take naps a lot. I haven't made a video yet today, Rudy, and I haven't even thought about what I'm going to do, but I will make one today. Actually, I have a couple ideas. I'm trying to get through all my mode videos that I'm still having no success finishing them. I have about 6 more to do. I'm a completer, Rudy. That's my in my brain. I'm a completer. I have to complete like these series of ideas. These, it's like I did all the major modes. I haven't done all the melodic minor, and I haven't done all the harmonic minor. I did one, super Locrian or alter dominant a couple weeks ago, and I need to fill those out, Dorian sharp 4 and those extra scales that I haven't done. So once I do that, then it's like, okay, we're going to do rhythm. And then we'll do sight reading with that. So, because sight reading is incredibly important. One of the biggest things beyond note recognition is rhythm recognition and memorized rhythms.
I grew up in an era where the rhythm section really locked in. Locked in. Like if there was a groove, the kick and the snare will be copacetic to whatever the bass groove was, right? But nowadays it seems to be a trend that the drums and the bass are not really playing the same thing. They're not supporting each other.
Right.
Where do you see that going stylistically? Is this something? Is this?
I think one of the elements to that happened during hip hop is when you would have instruments that have tremendous low end, and then you couldn't have competing instruments playing in the same range at the same time. Because in rock, when people would play the same thing, the kick would hit, and in old rock records, you would typically have, certain metal records would have no bass. Bands like Metallica and things, they started having bass, but you'd find a lot of early metal records that wouldn't have a lot of bass on them. But typically rock records would have a big low end, a kick that punched through but was not super subby, like you started to have in nu metal and things like that, that would have a lot of sub, and then the kick a lot of times would be the lowest instrument, with the bass being above the kick. But the the kick punches through the low end, and the kick and the bass are married, but they're accentuating different frequencies. But nowadays, with all the massive low end that you have with certain tracks, people expect to have subwoofers, and you can't get the bass and the kick drum doing the same things. Otherwise, it's just complete mud. I think that's one of the reasons, and I've noticed that. Well, that's why they don't play at the same time.
It makes total sense.
Let me ask you this too: when you first came to LA and people were playing eighth notes with a metronome, I mean, it was very different than playing in Florida, in Miami.
Yeah, this is something that I had to really take a look at the way that I played. And it mostly happened actually when I joined Ozzy, because those records were recorded by Bob Daisley, who used to pick. Mm-hmm. And it's very metronomic playing, not just for Bob, but every bass player from that genre. Even if you listen to Steve Harris, who played with his fingers, it was the fact that he could play very metronomic with his fingers.
Yeah.
Everybody else used to pick. And it's just a matter of, again, like me noticing that the new vibe on the rhythm section is to be a little bit offset. Mm-hmm. Being that offset as a rock bass player playing with Cuban musicians, it wasn't really that we were offset. It was like we swung a certain way.
Right.
So we all played in that style.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There was like a back to the backbeat.
Right.
Tumbao,
Yeah.
And so I had to, once I started playing with Ozzy, I became very, very much aware of that, because Tommy Aldridge was a very precise, fast flash drummer that leaned forward. Mm-hmm. Tommy, his first band, Black Oak, Arkansas, and then later on he started playing with Pat Travers. Those were all stadium bands, mm-hmm. Which means that your music needs to reach the back row. So just like even Van Halen, they were really well known for leaning forward when you play. You're not rushing. You're just you're playing in front of the beat, mm-hmm. which creates excitement. It's a very exciting place to be in that pocket. So I had that element that I couldn't, fall back too behind, because I would sync with Tommy, especially playing a lot of double kick drums.
Yeah.
So I really had to work on it. There were songs where I needed to cut right through, and since I didn't play with a pick, I would use my thumb, like Suicide Solution, and all that. That was just thumping it, And Ozzy used to look at me like, "What are you doing?" When we started doing live the songs from Diary of a Madman, the bass players didn't have choices of gauges back then.
Right.
So we had the 45 to 105.
That was it.
And that was it. That was it. It round one or flat one. That was it.
Yeah.
So once we started detuning, I had the worst fret buzz. And it would all come through the horns. We had all these massive horns back then, on the PA system.
Yes.
And it would sound clicky and
horrible.
trashy. And
Yeah. I remember.
Horrible. So I said, okay, I'm going to pick up a fretless. So I started playing a without markers or anything, just a blonde neck fretless precision for the detune songs. And after about a year of playing that, Ozzy comes to me on stage and looks at me and goes, "Your bass doesn't have any bloody frets." It took him a year to, and it sounds like Believer, don't, it's like you could hear it, the fretless really clear.
Right.
I mean, he goes out there and he goes berserk. He's in his own world. He's like, I used to compare it to like the transition from the guy, from the Wolfman, what was it? Something Tate, right? To the Wolfman. You know, you're like one moment you're human, and then to throw you on stage, and you're like, you're the Wolfman. You know, so that was basically Ozzy. You know, he's out there.
Okay, so one other thing I wanted to touch on is about rigs, 70s versus 80s, for example, and playing rigs. What did you play as far as amplifiers back then, especially? Because I'm always curious about that.
I got to say, as far as bass rigs, if you look at any 70s footage of like the Midnight Special or in concert acoustic amplifiers.
Acoustic amps. They were really big, yeah.
The 360s.
360,
and the fact, and even just the fact alone that Jacko played it.
Yeah. Well, honestly,
that
and even on guitar, Pat Metheny played through acoustic 134. I mean, it was just people played through acoustics. They were very common, really common amps. You'd see them on stage all the time.
Absolutely. Then acoustic faded for some reason. The company faded as a brand. And actually, that's a really good question because about 5 years ago, I started playing acoustic amplifiers.
Okay.
Just because it's a brand that is owned by Guitar Center. They own the brand. So here locally, where I live in LA, there's a Guitar Center rehearsals place. And I went there to rehearse. I didn't bring my own amplifier, and in the room they had an acoustic, the new one with the A10s and the head, and I plug in and I go, my God, it sounds just like my old sound that I was looking for, but it was analog. It was now so I started using them for a few tours and I loved it. Then they changed it to digital. They got rid of those heads, and I went like, oh my God. So lately I've been using TC Electronics bass rig, which sounds fantastic. I love the head. It's great. But going back to the old days, I went from playing acoustic in Miami, my 360. I sold it when I left. Then I started playing with Quiet Riot. And they had the next version, the 371 acoustics. The band owned it. And then I joined Ozzy, and they originally, Bob Daisley had ordered Marshall bass amps.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And if you look at the profile of the Marshall bass cabinet, it's the same profile as the guitar cabinet.
Yeah.
There's no depth to it.
Yeah.
So it was not the sound that I was used to. So we got rid of those and we got SVTs.
Got it.
So I started playing SVTs, and they were great. But there was an evolution of the bass guitar in early 80s that everybody, in order to compete with the synthesizers, and also because Stanley Clarke kind of like made that alembic sound.
Yeah.
Like the tone. That's the tone.
Yeah.
And Louis Johnson with the Music Man. So I actually, first thing I did, I had a 67 Jazz, which I Frankenstein completely myself. I couldn't afford somebody to do it for me. And I put a preamp in it, and it was ugly. But it worked. And then I joined Ozzy, and I got the Music Man, which I used until it was stolen out of a recording studio I was working out of. So all of a sudden, bass players don't want to sound like bass players anymore. That old 70s sound that we fell in love with, we couldn't use that because we had to compete with synthesizers.
Right. Yeah.
And it was like, damn, okay, now we got to sound more electric than ever.
Yeah.
So one way to do that also on stage is to start triamping my rig. Once I started playing with Quiet Riot right after Ozzy, I got a bass rig from Peavey, and it was actually a PA cabinets,
right,
and power amps and a mixer. It was a PA rig that I had on stage.
Right,
and then I used that from Quiet Riot to Whitesnake, and then I started playing with Dio, and they had their own bass rig. And what I'm going is I'm shrinking. As the times go by, I'm shrinking. I'm going back to my original sound, and that's where I'm at right now. I went back to my roots. I went to my original sound. I I found this pickup company. I have my own Spectre bass signature model, and I wanted to be different from anything else that they offered. So I found this company called Sims Pickups. And what they do is that their pickups, you can switch them individually to have them be either split coil, single coil, or humbuckers.
That's
Which,
cool. That's great.
and I use Bartolini active passive preamp. So if I need a passive tone, I pull it out, or if I need active, I kick it in. But
That's great.
It's a very musical preamp. It's not ugly sounding, So again, I'm trying to get as almost as organic as possible with the Guess Who, the band, the sound of the band. You have to always have to go with the sound of the band. I must play either a Fender jazz or something like that, and I have both. I have a Fender Marcus Miller jazz, which is a beautiful bass. That one is active and passive.
Okay.
And then I got a 5-string custom made Fender custom shop, and I also have my Spectre version. It's a Coda version of the jazz bass, which is probably what I'm going to wind up touring with right now, because lately I've been using the original bass player's Fender,
right.
but he wants it back. Yeah.
Rudy, I really appreciate you being with me today. This is really, really fantastic and absolutely fascinating.
Such a treat, it really is. It really is. And I got to tell you, every morning I get up and I check YouTube, or I get the notice, on Twitter that you have a new post, and everything, and it's just perfect. It's like, I have my coffee, I watch your tutorial, pick up my bass, I try the new things that you're teaching. I've been going over the pentatonics, because in rock and roll we play it's so pentatonic bass.
Yeah.
Even the songwriting is pentatonic.
Yeah.
Using as a chord base all the five notes. And once you threw in the on the G7, you threw in that tritone.
Yeah.
That was it. It was like that's the pentatonic I've been missing all this time.
That's right, the tritone pentatonic.
Yeah.
I know.
It's like,
I love that
dude.
one.
Oh yeah, but that's the first time, and I've been watching a bunch of pentatonic tutorials from just about everybody. That's the first time I heard the tritone, pentatonic.
Excellent.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
God bless you. Take care.
You too.
Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel and hit the notification button to let you know when new videos are coming out. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.